Did they really think the guy who made the nations tremble was untouchable? Turns out that even world conquerors end up taking the same dirt nap as everyone else. And when God said judgment was coming, did they assume he was joking? Or did they just think his enemies were too big for him to handle? Well, this week, we're diving into Isaiah chapter 14, verses 17 to 32. And God is reminding the nations of something they constantly seem to forget. No empire is as permanent as it thinks it is. Babylon looked unbeatable. They had power, influence, armies, and enough pride to think they would stand forever. But Isaiah essentially says, not so fast. The king who once made nations tremble would eventually end up in the same place as everyone else, in the grave. It turns out all the boasting, conquering, and self-glory in the world cannot stop the hand of God. History has a funny way of humbling those who think they are untouchable. Then Isaiah turns his attention to Philistia and tells them not to throw a victory party just yet. I mean, isn't that just like us? One problem disappears and we immediately think all our troubles are over. Humanity has spent thousands of years building kingdoms, naming things after ourselves, and acting like we're permanent fixtures on the earth, only to eventually become a paragraph in a history book and maybe a museum exhibit if we're lucky. Isaiah reminds us that while nations rise and fall and leaders come and go, God remains firmly seated on the throne. And honestly, that's incredibly comforting, because if history were left up to mankind, we'd probably mess it up in about 5 minutes. Thankfully, the Lord is still in control, and his plans will always stand. Let's get to it. Welcome to Connecting the Gap. This is a podcast about marriage, Bible, and book studies. We interview people that have a story. I'm Daniel Moore, your host. Thank you guys for joining us this week. If not familiar with our show, check out our website, connectingthegap.net, for our links to our platforms. Our YouTube and Rumble links are there. We're also on your Alexa and Google smart devices. You can also visit us on social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at CTGap Online. If you're a fan of our show, please subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment on our platforms. Give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. And we thank you in advance for doing that. Well, we get to announce that our new book has arrived. I have completed the first volume, volume 1 of the book of Isaiah, the verse-by-verse study. This is the study that we're going through right now, and the volume has chapters 1 through 39 in it. It is available in ebook on Amazon and Google Play, and then it's also available in a hardback and a paperback. And you can get those pretty much anywhere you can get books online. They're available at Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon. So go check that out. Get your copy today. And anything that you purchase from us, and if you can go to our website, you can see all of the resources that we have available, as we have some marriage books that we've released as well. All that's on our website at connectingthegap.net. And so you can go ahead and pick that up there, or just go visit one of your online retailers and pick up a copy. And all those funds that you put into that will go back into our ministry and help us to keep our podcast rolling here as we endeavor to do our book studies and the marriage ministry that we have and everything that we try to accomplish here with this ministry. That sows into that, and we appreciate that. So go get your copy today, and you can follow along with this study as we go through it. So this week, we're going to go ahead and continue chapter 14, and we're going to finish it this week. And then next week is a special episode, and I've been talking about it a few times here over the last few weeks. We are going to be doing a deeper dive into chapter 14, and we're going to cover a lot of territory about Sheol. We're going to talk about the Rephaim, the giants. We're going to hit a lot of stuff next week. The Abraham's bosom, you name it, we're going to go through it. Archangels, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. So that's coming up next week. We're going to do that in one episode, so it'll probably be a little bit longer, more extended episode. And that episode is not in the book. It's actually an extra that I'm throwing in just for the podcast, so you don't want to miss that. So make sure you subscribe. That way you don't miss any episodes here from Connecting the Gap. Well, we've rambled long enough. Let's get into this. This week, we're going to go ahead and wrap up chapter 14 as we venture our way through verses 17 through 32. So as we start this week, let's go ahead and read our text, as we usually do. And again, this is from the ESV version of the Bible. Verse 17 says, "Who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities? Who did not let his prisoners go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out, away from your grave like a loath branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers never more be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons, because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities." Verse 22, "I will rise up against them, declares the Lord of hosts, and will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, descendants and posterity, declares the Lord. And I will make it a possession of the hedgehog and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord of hosts." Verse 24, "The Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountain trample him underfoot. And his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from their shoulder. This is the purpose that is purposed concerning the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has purposed, and who will annul it? His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back?" In the year of the king Ahaz died, came this oracle. "Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken. From the serpent's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be flying fiery serpent. And the firstborn of the poor will graze, and the needy lie down in safety. But I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant it will slay. Wail, O gate, cry out, O city, melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you. For smoke comes out of the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. What will one answer the messengers of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge." That's Isaiah chapter 14, verses 17 through 32. So let's go ahead and get started here with verse 17. "Who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home." This line continues a poetic taunt that we were talking about last week in last week's episode against the king of Babylon, a seemingly mighty oppressor who is now fallen. The question is rhetorical, highlighting the extent of the destruction caused by this tyrant. The reference to making the world like a desert and overthrowing cities points to the king's ruthless conquest and scorched earth policies. He is accused of leaving widespread desolation in his wake. Not letting his prisoners go home reflects the Babylonian policy of exile, most notably seen in the captivity of Judah in 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah 52. Babylon notoriously deported defeated peoples to suppress uprisings and integrate foreign talent into its empire. Historical records like the Cyrus Cylinder, which speaks of returning exiles in the Persian period, contrast this behavior with later more merciful rulers. Verse 18, "All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb." This verse draws a contrast between the fallen tyrant and other deceased kings. It suggests that most kings received dignified burials with proper rites and monuments. Ancient Near Eastern cultures considered proper burial in tombs as honors due to dignity and legacy. Even enemy kings were often buried in their own land and with rituals signifying their high status. However, the implication here is that the king of Babylon does not receive such a burial. This is significant symbolically and conveys divine judgment. The verse sets up the humiliation described in the next verse. It says, "But you are cast out, away from your grave, like a loath branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot." This graphic image reveals the shameful fate of Babylon's king. He is cast out of his grave like a loath branch, a rejected and diseased offshoot, symbolizing rejection and disgrace. Instead of a tomb, he lies among slain warriors, pierced and disposed of, akin to a corpse thrown into a common pit. Ancient warfare often left bodies unburied and considered shameful and indicative of divine curse. You can read about that in Deuteronomy 28, verse 26. Trampled corpses were viewed as desecrated and dishonored. The metaphor of being thrown to the pit connects to Sheol, the underworld, often viewed as the grim fate for the godless or notorious oppressors. In Assyrian and Babylonian ideology, kings considered themselves semi-divine. Here, the reversal of fate highlights God's sovereign judgment. John Oswalt notes that the passage contrasts human pride with divine justice, turning honor into dishonor. Verse 20 continues, "You will not be joined with them in burial because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers never more be named." This verse reinforces the shame by barring the tyrant from even being buried alongside other rulers. The verse underlines moral culpability. The king is denied a resting place because of the destruction he caused among his own people, not just foreign nations. The self-destruction was so comprehensive that his memory and lineage deserved to be obliterated. The phrase offspring of evildoers is likely a reference to dynastic lines. In the ancient world, kings were desperate to have their names and families continue. In contrast, this king's legacy leads to a cursed conclusion. The historical Babylonian kings like Nebuchadnezzar and later Belshazzar ruled with oppressive might. Though Isaiah 14 doesn't specify a name, the passage's application transcends one monarch. Many scholars, including Aleph Mocher, interpret these verses not only as historical but also symbolic of human pride that exalts itself against God. Some also see typological application to Satan's fall, connecting verses 12 through 20, though this is often debated. As we summarize these four verses, 17 through 20, they use poetic and prophetic language to expose the downfall of a once exalted, wicked ruler symbolized in the king of Babylon, emphasizing God's ultimate justice over human arrogancy and tyranny as demonstrated in the king's humiliating death and his loss of legacy. Verse 21 of chapter 14, "Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face with the world with cities." This verse refers to the judgment proclaimed against the king of Babylon and by extension his nation. The instruction to prepare slaughter for his sons shows the depth of divine judgment. It targets not only the present ruler, but his descendants as well. In the ancient Near Eastern world, eliminating a monarch's line ensured no future threat or restoration of a dynasty. According to the pulpit commentary, the mention of sons suggests both biological offspring and symbolic continuity, those who would continue in the ways and policies of the wicked king. The goal is stated clearly, lest they rise and possess the earth. This reflects a concern that the oppressive empire of Babylon could rise again and if any remnant survives. Babylon, historically known for expansion and conquest under kings like Nebuchadnezzar, was infamous for constructing powerful cities and consolidating territorial power. Thus, the verse warns against a revival of that empire-building spirit, represented here by fill the face of the world with cities. John Calvin comments that this condemnation reveals God's intent not only to punish past sins, but to stop the potential continuation of wicked dominance. Babylon's legacy was one of idolatry, pride, and oppression of God's people, and this is symbolic of the larger rebellion of human pride against divine authority. Verse 22, "I will rise up against them, declares the Lord of hosts, and will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, descendant and posterity, declares the Lord." Here the Lord himself declares judgment. "I will rise up against them" indicates personal intervention by God. It is not left solely to human agents or circumstances. The comprehensive nature of this destruction is emphasized in the list: name, remnant, descendant, and posterity. This fourfold expression indicates the complete eradication, not just of physical lineage, but also any memory, influence, and continuation of Babylon's rule. The phrase "cut off from Babylon" is significant. In the Hebrew tradition, to be quote-unquote cut off is a strong image denoting divine judgment. Babylon, a symbol of humanity's rebellion against God from Genesis 11 onward, starting there at the Tower of Babel, is to be erased in its entirety. Albert Barnes notes that this verse is especially poignant because preserving a name and posterity was considered a crucial honor in ancient cultures. Thus, for a nation's name to be erased means total disgrace and obliteration. This fulfills what later happened historically. Babylon, once the most powerful city in the world, fell and gradually became a ruin. The phrase declares the Lord, which is used twice in this scripture, intensifies the certainty and authority of the judgment. This is not the word of the prophet alone, but a divine verdict, underlining both the weight and inevitability of the destruction. Verse 23, "And I will make it a possession of the hedgehog and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord of hosts." This verse describes the complete desolation of Babylon in poetic terms. God says he will turn it into a place inhabited only by wild creatures, such as the hedgehog. Some translations render it as porcupine or even owl, depending on the Hebrew word kupaz, and pools of stagnant water. These images evoke a scene of abandonment and ruin. The broom of destruction is a striking metaphor unique in Scripture. It portrays God as a housekeeper who sweeps away the filth, here symbolizing evil, pride, and corruption. Kill and DeLeach interpret this as the complete removal of Babylon as something unclean and spiritually toxic. Historically, Babylon lost its independence after its conquest by Cyrus the Great in 539 BC, though it remained significant for some generations. However, over time, due to invasions, neglect, and geographical changes, such as changes in the course of the Euphrates, the area became marshy and deserted. This fulfills the prophecy, as accounts from later travelers and archaeologists note the presence of wildlife and stagnant water. Verse 24, "The Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand." This verse serves as a solemn confirmation. The Lord of hosts swears that his plan will be accomplished. The phrase "has sworn" adds immense weight. Divine oaths are rare and signify absolute certainty. It reinforces the idea that not only will Babylon fall, but that God's sovereign plan is unchangeable and perfectly executed. The dual phrases "as I have planned" and "as I have purposed" emphasize divine intentionality in history. According to Matthew Henry, this demonstrates that nations rise and fall according to God's will, and not merely human power or politics. No matter how great a kingdom may seem, like Babylon, it cannot ultimately stand against the decrees of the sovereign Lord. This verse also functions theologically to underpin the entire preceding passage. It reminds the Jews that God has a plan for the exaltation of his people and the judgment of their enemies, and that no evil regime can thwart his long-term redemptive and just purposes. So these four verses, 21 to 24, form a strong climax to God's declaration against Babylon. They reveal God's total judgment upon a proud and oppressive empire, promise its permanent desolation, and confirm the absolute sovereignty of God in global affairs. Historically fulfilled in the demise of Babylon, they continue to serve a theological and prophetic message about the fate of all powers that exalt themselves against God and oppress his people. Moving on to verse 25, "That I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains trample him underfoot, and his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from their shoulder." This verse shifts focus somewhat from Babylon to Assyria, another great imperial power of the time. Although most of Isaiah 14 has been directed at Babylon, Assyria is now directly mentioned, indicating that God's sovereignty and judgment extend to all oppressive nations. The phrase "in my land" and "on my mountains" signifies that this will take place in the land of Israel, specifically Judah, which is often characterized by its mountainous terrain. This prophecy likely refers to God's miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from the Assyrian army during the reign of King Hezekiah, when Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, laid siege to the city. According to 2 Kings 19 and Isaiah 37, the Assyrians were defeated not by Judah's military might, but by divine intervention, as the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 soldiers in one night. The yoke and burden are metaphors for Assyria's oppressive domination. By removing these, God is promising relief for his people from foreign domination. Matthew Henry notes that this is a promise not only of physical rescue, but spiritual encouragement, a sign of God's presence, power, and protection for his covenant people. Historically, although Assyria dominated the Near East for centuries and conquered the north kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, its advance into Judah was ultimately halted, preserving Jerusalem. This event was considered a turning point in the perception of Assyria's invincibility and is used here as an example of God's power to humble any empire. Verse 26, "This is the purpose that is purposed concerning the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations." This verse universalizes the lesson from Assyria. What God did with Assyria is a pattern of judgment that applies to all nations. The purpose that is purposed emphasizes the divine sovereignty and intentionality in God's dealings with nations. His actions are never random or reactionary. They unfold according to his will. The whole earth and all the nations indicate that God's rule isn't limited to Israel or Babylon or Assyria, but encompasses the entire globe. In prophetic literature, this reveals the monotheistic vision that all powers, regardless of might or distance, are subject to the Lord. John Oswalt, in his commentary on Isaiah, notes that this is one of the clearest statements of universalism in the book. God is not a tribal deity, but the sovereign Lord of all history. The hand that is stretched out is a metaphor for divine action and power that cannot be hindered. Verse 27, "For the Lord of hosts has purposed, and who will annul it? His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back?" This verse reinforces and emphasizes the unchangeable nature of God's decisions and purposes. It functions as a rhetorical assertion. If God decides something, there is no one who can oppose or reverse it. The Lord of Hosts, a title emphasizing God's command over heavenly armies, underscores his supreme authority and power. The two rhetorical questions echo other biblical declarations of God's absolute sovereignty, such as in Job 42:2 and Romans 9:19. No human power, nation, or ruler can interfere with what God has determined. Killen DeLeach explained that this verse is a climax showing that history is not random or dictated by human kings and empires, but governed by God's decree. It's especially potent in a prophetic context, reminding people of faith that world events are not beyond God's control, even when wicked nations seem to prosper or dominate. In the last few verses of this chapter, we move on to a pronouncement against Philistia. Verse 28, "In the year that King Ahaz died, came this oracle." This verse introduces a new section and context. Isaiah uses this historical marker, "in the year that King Ahaz died," to signal the timing of the oracle that follows, which is verses 29 and onward, which deals with the nation of Philistia. King Ahaz died around 715 BC. His reign was marked by political instability, idolatry, as you can read about in 2 Kings 16, and an unwillingness to trust God. The death of a king often raised questions or concerns about national security and future leadership. In ancient times, such moments were seen as both politically volatile and prophetically significant. The sudden shift reminds the reader that Isaiah's oracles are contextual and deal with multiple nations over a period of time. According to the pulpit commentary, verse 28 serves as a narrative hinge, introducing the next burden of oracle against Philistia, but connects thematically in that both Babylon and Philistia symbolize human pride and evil, which God ultimately overthrows. These last four verses, 25 through 27, they reiterate God's sovereignty in world affairs, first referencing his deliverance of Judah from Assyria, then applying the lesson universally. Verse 28 introduces the next prophetic section, again tied to historical and theological themes of divine authority and judgment. These verses reveal the overarching biblical theme that God rules over history, and no empire, however powerful, can stand against his will. Verse 29, "Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken, For from the serpent's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying fiery serpent. This verse is a prophetic warning to the Philistines. It begins with a prohibition against celebration. The rod that struck you likely refers to a ruling power that previously subdued or afflicted Philistia, most likely referring to King Ahaz of Judah, Assyrian oppression, or a regional Israelite ruler who opposed them. The Philistines may have rejoiced at the death of Ahaz, noted in verse 28, or at a temporary reprieve from Judah or Assyria. However, Isaiah warns them not to rejoice too soon. From the serpent's root, which is a metaphor for the defeated power, will come an adder, a more venomous serpent, and further still, a flying fiery serpent, a more dangerous creature still. This progression suggests not relief, but escalation. The imagery of serpents symbolizes increasing danger, aggression, and divine judgment. Most commentators agree this is a metaphor for increasing military or political threat. The serpent could represent the Davidic line or the Assyrians. Interpreters differ. But the prophecy assures that Philistia's expectation of peace will be disappointed. The pulpit commentary notes that this could refer to Hezekiah, who succeeded Ahaz and who would become a much stronger ruler, ultimately subduing the Philistines in 2 Kings 18:8. Historically, the Philistines were a constant threat and rival to Israel and Judah. Isaiah's prophecy declares that their rejoicing at temporary relief would be short-lived and that stronger oppression was coming. Verse 30, "And the firstborn of the poor will graze, and the needy lie down in safety. But I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant it will slay." This verse contains comforting words for the poor and needy of Israel, contrasted with continued woe for Philistia. The firstborn of the poor, a poetic expression likely referring to the most vulnerable among Judah, will now experience security and tranquility, no longer oppressed by hostile neighbors. Conversely, God will strike at Philistia's very root, meaning its source of strength and life, likely its leadership or central power. Famine is used metaphorically here as a form of divine judgment. And your remnant it will slay suggests total devastation. There will be no survivors of the judgment. Commentators such as Kill and Delitzsch explain that this juxtaposition shows God's justice, while the meek flourish under his protection. The proud and oppressive are destroyed. Matthew Henry observes that the prophecy ensures God's people under duress will ultimately be saved, while those who rejoice in their trouble will face ruin. Verse 31, "Wail, O gate, cry out, O city, melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you. For smoke comes out of the north, and there is no straggler in its ranks." This verse uses vivid imagery to invoke fear and mourning throughout the Philistine cities. The gate and city represent places of strength and civic structure, but they are now scenes of lamentation and fear. Isaiah calls upon all Philistia to tremble because disaster is approaching. The reference to smoke from the north symbolizes the rising threat of an invading army, most likely the Assyrians or even a prophecy extending to Babylon. Smoke emerging from the north implies destruction, fire, and the movement of conquest. In the geography of the region, northern invasions often came from Mesopotamia, where both Assyria and Babylon were located. The phrase "no straggler in his ranks" emphasizes the discipline and power of this approaching force. There will be no weakness in the invading army. It is perfectly organized and unstoppable. John Gill notes that this aspect of the army suggests divine empowerment. The judgment is precise, swift, and thorough. Historically, the Assyrian Empire did conduct brutal campaigns against Philistine cities. Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Sennacherib all led military campaigns into the region, devastating many Philistine centers. And the final verse in this chapter, verse 32. "What will one answer the messengers of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge." This final verse concludes with a rhetorical question and answer. It anticipates envoys or messengers from Philistine cities, or perhaps from other surrounding nations, inquiring about Judah's security or the meaning of the events unfolding. The answer is clear and theologically rich. The Lord has founded Zion. That is, the strength and stability of Jerusalem or Zion and its inhabitants do not lie in military might or political alliances, but in the Lord himself. He is the one who defends and preserves his people. In her, the afflicted of his people find refuge, assures that God is a refuge for the oppressed of Israel. Despite external threats and hardships, Zion, as the center of God's presence, is ultimately secure. According to the Expositor's Bible Commentary, this verse contrasts with the fate of Philistia. While Philistia will be destroyed, Zion will stand and be a shelter. The afflicted, those humble and dependent on God, will experience security and divine protection. This concluding remark refocuses the entire oracle. What happens to nations like Philistia and Babylon, God has established his dwelling among his people, and Zion will never be forsaken. It is a declaration of hope, rooted in divine promise rather than military strength. These final verses, 29 to 32, are an oracle against Philistia, warning them not to take comfort in current events such as the death of a Judean king. Instead, worse judgment is coming in the form of stronger rulers and invading powers. The prophecy declares destruction upon Philistia, but promises peace and protection for the poor and humble of Israel. The final verse encapsulates the entire message. God alone is the refuge and foundation for his people, and his purposes for Zion will stand, regardless of the plans or rejoicing of enemy nations. That wraps up chapter 14 as we walk through it verse by verse for this week. Next week we come back, we will have our special episode that I've been talking about, so you don't want to miss that. Make sure you visit our website, connectingthegap.net, for everything about our ministry, and be sure to check out our brand new book. The first 39 chapters of this study has been released. It's 752 pages long. It's a big, thick book. It has all of this material in it that we're going through right now. Over 130 illustrations. It's just a really nice put together book. The publishers did a great job publishing that, putting it together. And you can find out all the details about that on our website at connectingthegap.net. Well, as we wrap up this week's episode, Isaiah chapter 14 is a striking prophetic chapter that alternates between hope for God's people and judgment upon oppressors, particularly Babylon and Philistia. It speaks to the sovereignty of God over nations, the downfall of proud empires, and the restoration of his people. This chapter begins with a promise of mercy and restoration for Israel in verses 1 and 2. God declares that he will again choose Israel and settle them in their own land. Not only will they return from captivity, but they will have dominion over their former oppressors. This is followed by a taunt against the king of Babylon in verses 3 to 21. A poetic and highly symbolic passage that portrays Babylon's fall with vivid imagery, including references to the arrogance of the king, his death, and the futility of his empire. He had exalted himself, but is pictured in Sheol, the realm of the dead, as just another fallen ruler, stripped of power and glory. Then the focus shifts to judgment declarations against Assyria in verse 25, showing that God's dominion and justice are not limited to one nation. God affirms his deliberate purpose over the whole earth in verses 26 to 27, emphasizing his unstoppable will. And as we finish the chapter with verses 28 to 32, they contain an oracle against Philistia, responding to their misplaced rejoicing at the death of a Judean king. They are warned not to celebrate prematurely because greater destruction is coming. And in contrast, Zion or Jerusalem is described as founded by the Lord, a safe place for the afflicted among his people. So how can we apply this to our lives today? Well, there's several points that we can pull out of this chapter. Number one, God is sovereign over nations. One of the key themes of the chapter is God's sovereignty. He raises up and brings down rulers and empires to accomplish his divine purposes. In our modern context, this reminds us that even as nations rise and fall and leaders come and go, God is still in control of history. The second thing is pride leads to downfall. The king of Babylon is portrayed as a figure who exalted himself, even aspiring to be like God, but was ultimately brought low. This principle is timeless. Human pride, arrogance, and self-glorification, especially when it defies God, leads to ruin. It's a personal warning against living for one's own greatness instead of submitting to God's authority. The third thing, God cares for the afflicted. While mighty rulers are judged, the poor and afflicted graze and lie down in safety under God's care. This speaks comfort to those who suffer, are oppressed, or feel forgotten. God's justice includes lifting up the weak and bringing down the powerful who exploit others. It also shows us that there's hope for God's people. This chapter opens with hope and restoration. For believers today, it anticipates the ultimate restoration that comes through Christ. Just as God promised to bring his people back to their land and give them rest, he offers spiritual rest, security, and restoration through Jesus for those who trust in him. A fifth thing we can pull out of this chapter, false security is dangerous. Philistia rejoiced when Ahaz died, assuming that a threat was removed. God warns them that worse was coming. This is a warning about placing trust in worldly events or temporary circumstances for security. True refuge is only found in the Lord. And the sixth thing we can pull out of this chapter, God's purpose cannot be stopped. In verses 26 and 27, it reminds us that what God has purposed will be fulfilled. His hand cannot be turned back. This should encourage believers to live with confidence in God's promises and his unchanging plan, even in a chaotic world. Isaiah 14 offers powerful insight into God's justice, authority, and care. It reveals that human power is fleeting, but God's kingdom is forever. For us today, it reinforces the importance of humility, trusting God's sovereignty, and resting in the security of his promises, not in the rise and fall of worldly powers. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. We'll be back next week, and we will take on our special episode, a deeper dive into chapter 14. So make sure that you're here and don't miss that. Please subscribe to this podcast. That way you don't miss any of the episodes that we release each week. And we'll look forward to being back here next week as we continue our episodes here in our verse-by-verse study in the book of Isaiah. Well, that's all for this week, and we believe that God's Word never fails us. God's Word has stood the test of time, and through Jesus' death on the cross, he has connected the gap. This episode is recorded in the upper room at our Connecting the Gap studios. This is an extension of Connecting the Gap Ministries. We pray that you have a blessed week.